All right, wonderful. So as I said, we were hoping to hear from our Italian colleagues as well, as they also Italy hasn't pledged yet, and we are hoping to hear whether they will be able to pledge or not. But they do not have an update as of now. Apparently, their House of Parliaments are meeting for a first time after the election tomorrow and electing their presidents. And they don't expect to have a government in place before the end of the month. And so it's still a bit early for advocacy with regard to their pledge, which is a bit worrying if we're thinking of the timing of making sure the pledge is being counted towards country allocation. But that's what it is. After we hear from our UK colleagues, give us a quick overview of where we are in the state of pandemic preparedness to sort of set the stage for a final and main presentation today, where we hear from Margot Nolo from Save the Children, will be telling us about the revision to the international health regulation. With this out of the way, James, I see that you're already online. Go ahead.
Great, thanks, Quentin. And first, by thanking everyone from across the GFAN family for all the support you've given to us in the UK for the campaign over the past year, and apologies for coming back to ask for more support, but I'm sure everyone understands now how difficult it is right now with the UK government following their cuts to overseas development assistance, and the urgent pressure that is still needed to uplift the UK's funding. So where we are right now, now Parliament is back in session. We could expect a pledge at any time from the UK. Our working assumption, it's most likely to come next week, but still waiting for a final date from our conversations with civil servants. But following the cuts to aid funding, unfortunately, it still looks very dire right now in the UK, and getting more difficult as well. So unfortunately, it appears likely that the UK could be planning to either maintain or cut funding compared to 2019, and urgent pressure is still really needed. So we've done some calculations from the One campaign and others, part of our UK CSO working group, in terms of the number of lives at stake, the number of infections at stake, and how much US funding we could be jeopardizing if we don't step up. And unfortunately, it all looks really grim. So we do have a short window now, literally of only a few days, to put as much pressure as we can on relevant ministers to feel the pressure from civil society, from parliamentarians, and other stakeholders as well. So really appreciate everything everyone's been doing over the past couple of weeks on this, including getting your respective governments to pressure on the UK, and supporting social media and other initiatives as well too. There's a few additional pieces that came out this week from UK CSO colleagues. So this includes the social media toolkit that can post in the chat here, where we're asking colleagues to use some of the suggested graphics and the messaging to treat online targeting the relevant government ministers, using messaging around what's on the line if the UK doesn't increase funding. And thanks to everyone who's been pushing that out so far this week. All of the graphics and the messaging are in the toolkit, so please do share this week if you haven't already. And we also, on Monday, Stop AIDS released a video of some of our engagement at the Labour Party and Conservative Party conference, where we took to the waters with a big banner saying we can end AIDS by 2030, don't miss the boat. And we again targeting this video at relevant ministers as well. So if you haven't already, please do share the resources both in the toolkit and the video as well too. But with the concerning continued intel coming out from the UK and the level of ambition that we can expect for them, Stop AIDS and other UK CSO colleagues are now preparing our strategy in a situation if it is a bad pledge from the UK, and seeing what opportunities, what messaging and what campaigning we can do to hopefully put pressure on the UK to make a supplementary increase, hopefully this year, and also looking ahead further into 2023 as well too. So we're currently finalising the strategy as part of the CSO working group, and be pleased to come back to you all next week as well, with our plan and suggested ideas on how international advocates could support this campaigning going forward as well. But particularly for the immediate term, if the UK does make a pledge, we need to make as much noise as we can next week. We'll have new graphics, new messaging, a sign-on letter ready to be circulated across GFAN, and with other plans over the next couple of months as well too. And of course, would continue welcoming the continued collaboration and ideas from you all as well too, in terms of the relationships and levers that you have that we can push forward as well too. And there's a few more additional opinion pieces and campaign actions planned for this week as well too. So don't want to spam everyone's emails too much, but I'll be sure to share these over the next few days when they're pushed out, and to keep everyone informed on if we hear any more intel from the UK, which could be shared. But yeah, I would see Vinny and a few other colleagues in the UK on the call, so I'm not sure if anyone else has anything else to update on this stage, and happy to take any questions as well.
Thanks a lot, James. And yeah, is there anyone from the UK? I know Chris Collins has his hand up, but I know for a fact he's American. Is there anyone from the UK who wants to add anything? Vincent?
Couldn't if I can, just to add, so yesterday the 3 all-party parliamentary groups that work on the 3 diseases, we were meant to have a meeting with the Minister for Global Health, Lord Goldsmith, and 2 hours before the meeting he cancelled for very spurious reasons. So take of that what you will, but I am certainly of the persuasion that they're now just at the point where they're evading us so much because they're going to really disappoint us. I've got absolutely nothing to base that on, but this meeting has now been rearranged 3 times, I think. And every time we get close to it, the government just pull the plug on it at the last minute. So take of that what you will, but I would argue that is a bad sign.
Yeah, so more good news. Thanks a lot, Vincent. It's a bit depressing. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear this update, but James, thank you. Do you have a sense if we really don't like the pledge? I'm really glad to hear you'll be going for an increase, and obviously we're all ready to go there with you. But do you plan to go negative? Like if we really don't like the pledge, do you have a sense of the tone you'll take?
Yeah, I think we have to go negative, given how much is at stake if the UK does make a cut as well. So if it's a cut, I think there's consensus across the UK CSO space that we'll go hard on the UK, focusing a lot on the analysis and what's at stake and what will happen in terms of excess deaths and infections as well too. And we're still, as I mentioned, working out the best strategy to see what pressures that could be there and how best we could push for an increase from the UK. Of course, recognizing the difficulties in global funds, country allocation, and by budgeting as well too. So I've drafted an email to colleagues at the Secretariat to get their thoughts on it as well too, and to also coordinate our respective plans on that as well too.
Thanks, James. Christy, go ahead.
Hey there, and thank you everyone for all of your help on this. You guys have just been complete rock stars. I just wanted to flag a couple of things that Ravini has in the works. We had Peter's op-ed in the Times, the Thunderer piece landed on Sunday. He had the Guardian article yesterday. We have a couple of op-eds that are in the queue right now. We're working the Tanzanian president for the Telegraph and the Malawi president for New York Times. Those are still in the works, but there have been some interest expressed. And then there's some other things going to the Independent and the Evening Standard. I just wanted to flag it so that we can coordinate op-eds. If you're going to be doing some, if you could please reach out either to James or to Ravini, because I know you guys are working really closely together so that we can make sure that we're not being competition for each other. But we are utterly grateful for everything you're doing. We just want to make sure on the op-ed piece that we are coordinated. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christy. I see. Is there any more questions from anyone on the call? While people are thinking on it, I have two questions actually. One is on tone, following up on Chris's question. As of now, I see that the tone is still quite positive ahead of the pledge, as in not positive, but perhaps not as negative. Is that something like, is that a line you're trying to hold to make sure that that the tone stays fairly neutral and not too bitter at this point? So that's my first question. And the second one with regard to a broader strategy in case of a lower than expected or lower than hoped pledge. Where have the next elections meant to be taking place? Because I think that's probably going to be a potential turning point in terms of investment in global health from the UK.
Two great questions. Thanks for that, Quentin. So the first one, I think still partly trying to maintain a relationship with some of the new ministers as well, to give them both the carrot and the stick. But I think our messaging and approach of the past few weeks have shifted a bit in terms of our public and parliamentary communication to again highlight what's at risk in terms of the number of deaths and what's at stake from the UK on making a cut. As well too, and yes, Vinny commented in the chat. January 2024 is the next proposed date for the election. Potential that it could come sooner with the chaos and the crisis the government is in right now in terms of domestic pressures on the UK. But the polling, of course, is very against our current government. I think Prime Minister Truss would wait until the very last minute to call an election. He is also
Thanks a lot, James. Sorry, I think I muted you by mistake there.
Yeah, no worries. But there has been, just on that point, for the past few weeks, very strong support from the opposition Labour Party on it as well too. So working closely with Preet Kaur-Gill, the Shadow International Development Minister, and others in the Labour Party too. So I think if there was a change of government, hopefully a more favourable outcome for the 8th replenishment too. But very much focusing right now on getting as much as we can from the UK this time around.
Right, thanks a lot, James. And yeah, so the fact that it's in a while tells us that we can't at this point completely burn bridges. So yeah, I guess we have to work with what we've got. Thanks a lot to all our colleagues from the UK, and in particular to you, James, first for your hard work and holding on for as long as you have so far. And it's been quite impressive to see you all at work. So on this, unless there is any more comments from any of the participants, but I don't see anything. So we will be moving on to not talk about the UK, and we are going to talk about pandemic preparedness. So we wanted to take the time to update you, and I apologize. Some of you might already have seen some of what I'm going to present, just because we've been giving similar presentations in a number of spaces over the past few months. But so as you know, the pandemic preparedness is it's an old topic. People have been working on this for a long time. But it became very mainstream around 2020. In the wake of COVID-19, and so we're going to take a second to summarize some of the processes that are in place. Take a second to update you on the latest developments around the PPPR5, and we'll hear from one side of one process that I think we haven't covered as much within GFAN. It's been the international health regulations. IHRs, and we have our colleague Margot will be presenting on the process of revising those. But before we get there, I wanted to make sure that everyone had some basic understanding of the different pieces of that puzzle in terms of remolding of our pandemic preparedness and response infrastructure. I apologize, I'm going to call it pandemic preparedness over the next few over the rest of the call, just because pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response is a bit of a mouthful. And also because I think whether or not prevention should be a priority in these discussions is something that is a bit debated. And I mean, at least I have strong opinions on that. So since 2020 and the obvious failures of our preparedness and response to COVID-19, there's been a lot of calls for reforms. And these calls have taken different forms and have led to different and parallel processes that have started pretty much as soon as COVID-19 was declared into a pandemic, and have been ongoing since. So the first one, and I think one that a lot of people will have heard of, is the Pandemic Treaty. It's a longer-term process. It's expected to be finalized by 2024 and expected to be a large overhaul of how we approach pandemics, how we prepare to them, how we respond. The key idea there is that we hope we'll have a plan for the next one, because as we saw, whatever plan we had ahead of COVID was not sufficient, it did not work. But it's being negotiated. It's clear at this point that it will not be, I think it's clear at this point that it might not be binding, which I think raises the questions of how much it will really solve the problem that it's trying to solve. But it's been leading to very, very interesting and fruitful conversations within the World Health Assembly. The other parallel process sorry, someone unmuted. Hi, Infinitix Hot 10. Sorry, so the other parallel process that is very much the opposite to the Pandemic Treaty has been the new fund that has been created under the leadership of the United States. The full name being the Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response Financial Intermediary Fund, so PPPR5. It's been launched at the beginning of the summer. It's moved very fast. It's raised $1.5 billion. And it's expected to launch its first request for proposal in a few months. And I'll come back to a few more details on that front, because, as I said, it's moving quickly. During the last United Nations General Assembly, which took place last month in New York, a high-level meeting on pandemic preparedness in 2023 has been announced. It'll be one of many high-level meetings that will take place in the next September. So alongside, in particular, the TBHLM, which is also scheduled for 2023. We do not know yet, I think, when exactly the pandemic preparedness HLM will be, but the assumption is that it would take place during the next UN General Assembly. And finally, and we'll hear a lot more about this process in a minute, there is the revisions that are being made to the international health regulations. But before we get to that presentation, I wanted to talk a bit more about, sorry, I'm skipping slides. No, I'm not. So why is it that as GFAN, we've been particularly interested in looking into pandemic preparedness? So for us, it's a topic that presents a number of opportunities and challenges. In terms of opportunities, because it's only recently became mainstream, there's really an opportunity to reclaim a topic that so far was really only, these conversations were heavily medicalized and expert driven. And we've seen that what had been put in place as a result of these expert-driven conversations was not able to hold when faced with a real-world pandemic. And so there really is an opportunity to redefine what we mean by pandemic preparedness, to put the people at the center, to push for community-based pandemic preparedness. And what we've seen is that when these decisions are being taken behind closed doors and are expert-led and do not and are shielded from the influence of communities and civil society, there's a loss of trust. And what we've seen during COVID is that losing trust is losing lives. And so we really think that that is important to move towards more resistant and more resilient societies where preparedness is embedded in communities, and we move away from a tech and material driven approach to pandemic preparedness and instead look towards strengthening human rights, strengthening human resources for health, and strengthening health systems. So that's that's one of the reasons that I think that is the key reason why we think pandemic preparedness is interesting, is because it's quite unclear what it will be, and this creates opportunities for us to define what that will be. But in parallel, there's also the evidence that when it comes to pandemic preparedness, expertise is a lot more spread out than in other topics. We've seen during COVID countries that were expected to do very well not do so well, and we've seen countries that were expected to not particularly do well do very well. So we've really seen that when it comes to pandemic preparedness, the sort of dichotomy between donor and receiving countries, North and South, have already been broken down by the pandemic. And we really think that really there is an opportunity to make the infrastructure that is being built to reform pandemic preparedness, to move away from these neo-colonial end models and build something that is not top-down and that is truly collaborative. As you might know, and you might have heard us talk about before, one of the things that GFAN has been working on is global public investment, GPI, which is one of these models who tries to reimagine what international collaboration and cooperation can be, and looking beyond aid. And we think that one of the obvious candidate for one of the issues that presents opportunities to push that kind of new model really is pandemic preparedness. There's two. So to give you a quick update on two of the mechanisms, the processes that we've been keeping an eye on. So on the PPR5, what we expect to see next, and so this is around like how we'll be funding the reform of pandemic preparedness. We are expecting the board of the new FIF to make decisions regarding the target and objectives of the upcoming request for proposal. We do not yet know what these targets and objectives are, and I'll come back to that in a second. And we also expect further details on the waiver to make Gavi, CEPI, and the Global Fund into a potential recipient of funds. As it stands, the only organizations that can receive funds from the new FIF are UN agencies and are development banks. And we think that is a problem because few of these organizations have a particularly good record when it comes to global health. And we think that if we truly want to reform the way we approach emerging pandemics, we need investment to go through organizations with a track record for impact, and you know, that means in particular Gavi, CEPI, and the Global Fund. Apologies. Yes, sorry, my window looks it's a bit of a mess. Finally, on the pandemic treaty, a quick update. It's a long-term process, but we expect the first outline to be releasing in April, so in a few months at this point. There's not that many opportunities for engagement because it's a WHO process, and they tend to be quite closed. There's been 3 rounds of consultations that just took place, and I want to say consultations with with hair quotes, because really there were just opportunities for people to post videos on the platform, and these videos were shared. So you can watch those videos now. It's an interesting repository of views on various issues. The 3 prompts that were given were legal matters, operationalities in achieving equity, and intellectual property and access to pandemic preparedness tools. So there was no really an opportunity for dialogue at this point, and we hope that some of the opinions expressed in those consultations will be taken on, but we don't know that for a fact. And so finally, before we move on to the international health regulations, last week there was the second board meeting of the PPPR5. So this is fresh off the press. I'm not the best person to talk about this because I was not there in the room, and I haven't yet gotten the chance to hear from people that were. but from what I've pieced together, so this was an important board meeting for the decisions that were taken, but also for decisions that were not taken. So in particular, the release of the first request for proposal has been pushed by a month. It was meant to happen mid-November, and it will now happen at the earliest mid-December, if not mid-January. This is important, and it's largely a good thing. It's a good thing because one of the challenges with that fund is that it's been moving very fast, and in fact too fast for real engagement to take place. So the fact that they are slowing down a little bit is reassuring, and it's important because one of the reasons apparently why they've been pushing back the RFP is because they've not been yet able to identify what are the targets and priorities for this RFP. That is to an extent worrying because they only have a couple months at this point to figure that out. And it seems that at this point there is no agreement around the vision, the theory of change they have for the money that they are going to spend, which is a bit worrying. It's not particularly surprising because as I said earlier, one of the reasons why as GFAN we are interested in pandemic preparedness is because a lot of things are a bit up in the air in terms of what works and what doesn't. And so where to spend money isn't obvious. Because there's not as much experience in that area as with other issues in global health, and so they've just created a working group, and they hope that the working group will be figuring out what their priorities will be for that first RFP. Finally, they have approved a TOR for the technical advisory panel. This is important because we want that technical advisory panel to include a number of representatives of civil society, not just medical experts. So we haven't yet released the TOR, and so we don't exactly know who will be allowed to be on the panel and who won't. But we're standing ready with a list of names of people to propose, as we think that it's important that we don't only have medical experts on this type of panels. The Pandemic Action Network, which is an organization you might have heard of because they've been very active around pandemic preparedness, are organizing a town hall with the civil society representative to the board of a PPPR 5th this Friday at the same time as this call, so 2 p.m. CET, 8 a.m. Eastern, which will be an opportunity to have a proper debriefing of what took place. And I recommend that anyone who is interested in the new fund register to attend. I am going to put all of that. All that in the chat. They have also released a call for expression of interest. I think they're working towards building up a proper constituency and delegation for the civil society representatives. And so they are looking for people who volunteer to be part of it. So all the links for these various initiatives are in the chat. I'm checking the time, and I'll pass on the floor to our colleague Margot. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is there any questions from any of the participants regarding some of that very quick background? No, amazing. So Margot, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Quentin. Can you see my screen? Is it fine?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to present on the international health regulations today. And you presented the treaty as a quite closed and rigid process owned by WHO. So this is another one, unfortunately. So I'll start with a very quick summary of what the IHRs are. So it's a binding instrument of international law. So it's one of the two global health instruments together with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that exist as of today. It's a bit old from 1969, but it was fully revised in 2005 after the SARS pandemic and the limitations that member states had seen in the operationality of the IHRs. It's adopted by 196 countries, so most of the countries that exist. So it's quite powerful in that sense that it creates rights and obligations for all of these countries. The goal of the IHRs are to prevent, protect against, control and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease. And what's very specific with the IHRs is what follows. Is that it has to avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. So there is this focus of the IHR of the relationship between public health and traffic and trade. And what's also very important with the IHR is that in addition to the, let's say, the international law and system of declaring an emergency, for example, it has also a set of capacities that state parties had to develop and maintain. And these capacities relate to the detection, assessment, and notification of public health events. So that's really the surveillance component. And also around the containment and response to public health risks and emergencies. And another specific criteria element of the IHR is that it's an all-hazard tool. So it does not only look at biological threats, but also chemical and nuclear risks. On the obligations of state parties, as I said, they have to maintain these core capacities, and this has been challenging over the years. They were supposed to be attained, I think, in 2012, and there were a number of extensions that were allowed for member states to reach the level of capacities that was considered necessary to be able to detect and respond to a health emergency. And even today, these capacities have not been achieved, let's say, by all of the state parties of the IHRs. What's interesting as well is that the IHRs ask that state parties cooperate in good faith and with transparency. So they have to share information, notify WHO whenever they identify a risk. So all of this cooperation is very important, but we've seen that there has been still limitation during the pandemic, and I'll come to that. Show self-restraint, so no unnecessary measures, and all of the measures that are taken by state parties have to be proportionate to risks. And we've seen during the pandemic with the travel bans, for example, that this is not necessarily always, that member states are not always very compliant with the IHRs when it comes to these additional measures that they are taking. And as I said, in addition to the cooperation, there is a need for collaboration and assistance between member states so they can support each other in building these capacities in responding to the emergencies. With regard to WHO, so the prerogatives are actually quite limited. The Director General can declare a public health emergency of international concern. So that's really when there is that's the highest, actually the only level of risk that exists within the IHR. So example of that are the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the Ebola outbreak in 2018 in DRC, or the one in West Africa in 2014-16. Zika was another. So it has happened a number of times that the DG had declared a public health emergency of international concern. And then it can issue temporary recommendations for member states to help respond to the emergency. The Secretariat of the IHR is relatively small. They don't have a lot of capacities to enforce the IHRs, but they have to verify all the information that is provided, and they also monitor these capacities that I've talked about. And some of you might be familiar with some of the components of the IHR monitoring and evaluation frameworks. We've been talking a lot about the joint external evaluations, for example, which are evaluations that have been taking place in countries to assess their level of capacity. So with a number of experts and the government as well. Weaknesses in the IHRs in terms of preparedness first. So the limited scope. As I said, it focuses mainly on the detection and containment of health emergencies, but not really on the prevention. And that's where it can be very complementary to the treaty, to the pandemic treaty, if the treaty will really focus on the prevention as well, because that's a bit forgotten by the IHRs. The weak core capacities overall, I've mentioned that. The lack of a whole of government approach. So if you talk about the IHRs, it's usually only a prerogative of the Ministry of Health, not something that other ministries are really aware of even, or at least being engaged in. And we've seen limited solidarity and inadequate financing of the IHR. So solidarity when it comes to the response, and the financing even in peacetime to help build preparedness capacities in countries. For response, as I said, there is only one alert, which is the fake. So an emergency is either a fake or not. So that has its limitation. There is a dependence of WHO on member states to get information and also to share the information. So that's important. And insufficient incentives and deterrence. So really the issue of compliance. We've seen, for example, that under the IHR, as per their obligations, South Africa and neighboring countries when detected Omicron, they shared the information, they shared everything, and then there were imposed travel bans. So countries responded negatively to this sharing of information. So that's not really an incentive to be compliant with the IHRs. And then a cross-cutting issue is the lack of institutional system of accountability. So overall, whether it's more on the preparedness core capacity side or even during the response, because even though countries implement these measures and they are not compliant with the IHRs, the WHO Secretariat has no way to really have the country change their policy. Now on the amendment process. So this is just to give you an idea of where the mandate is coming from. So that's quite recent. It was at the executive board of the WHO in January, and then complemented with a resolution at the World Health Assembly in May. So the idea is that member states have now established a new working group, which will discuss and negotiate the amendments to the IHRs. And then in addition to that, the Director General is convening an IHR review committee, which is a specific committee giving advice or recommendation to the Director General, so not to member states, really to WHO, on they will assess the amendments that have been proposed and make an assessment based on their expertise. This is the timeline. In January already, the US submitted proposals for the amendment to the IHRs. That's how the agenda came up at the World Health Assembly. On all the amendments that were proposed by the USA, only one was adopted, which is about the entry into force. So they have shortened the delay for the entry into force of potential amendments. All the other amendments would be that have been proposed by the US will be viewed in the package of the other amendments of member states. So to be fair, they have given a new deadline of September 31st for everyone to submit amendments. And by the deadline, there were 14 submissions, including a few from 4 actually from state parties as a group. So that's what now is on the table for the negotiations. The IHR review committee, as I mentioned, has been established. They had their first meeting last week, and they will continue to convene regularly until mid-January, when they have to submit their reports to the DG. And the WG-IHR, so this new working group of member states, will start, will be formed next month. And the deadline to finalize the amendments is May 2024. So the timing has been aligned to the timing of the pandemic treaty, because the two processes are really intertwined. Because they will have to decide what's going to the IHR, what's going to the treaty, because you don't want overlaps between the two. Otherwise, member states might be confused when it comes to the implementation. So which tool, which instrument to use. So I just wanted to flag a few topics that have came up in the proposal. So just a disclaimer that this is non-exhaustive. It's based on 4 submissions that we were able to access, 2 from countries and 2 from groups of countries. So far what we've seen in terms of the articles and issues that are common, but of course with lots of differences depending on the group, whether you're looking at a group from the north or from the south of member states. You will see in the negotiations that it's going to be the standpoints are quite different. So first, it's in terms of the notification to add genomic data into the list of information that state parties have to provide. So it's not yet in the IHR, the issue around genomic data, but we've seen how critical it has been during the COVID-19 pandemic to be able to then develop vaccines and therapeutics. So member states are very keen to have this kind of data shared as part of the IHRs. Then the determination of the fake, so the public health emergency of international concern. Some member states would like to see an intermediate or regional level of alerts. So you can have some sort of a scale, but other member states disagree with that. Article 44 on collaboration and assistance, to increase the means of collaboration between state parties. Some member states would like to see the notion of common but differentiated responsibilities when it comes to the response or the core capacities. And some member states have also asked that WHO organize better this collaboration. In terms of the procedure, so I told you that there is no mechanism for compliance and accountability. So several member states have suggested that a new committee be established. So some call it implementation or compliance, or some sort of special committee that would be able on a regular basis to assess really where countries stand in terms of the implementation of the IHRs, give recommendation, etc. So have maybe not a conference of parties, but something relatively similar. And finally, the Annex 1 on the core capacities to include more capacities. So right now, as I said, it's really focusing on the surveillance and the response. And some member states have proposed either specific things around genomic sequencing. So everybody has to be able to sequence genome, which is very ambitious. Others are saying that we should integrate more of the health system functioning and resilience, which might be an interesting idea. In terms of the civil society engagement, as I said, I think it has been quite limited so far because it's a very technical tool owned by WHO and member states. So not so many engagement, but it's still necessary because of the lack of compliance and accountability. And I think civil society have historically played a big role in holding governments accountable. So that could be one. To help build the core capacities for those who have the capacity to support governments in countries, to train people, to establish and I think the Global Fund, for example, has been quite critical in developing some capacities around surveillance laboratory and etc. So that helps to build the IHR core capacities as well. To monitor human rights violations during public health response, human rights is recognized as a key principle in the IHRs, but when it comes to implementation, we know that it has not been optimal. And then advocate for greater collaboration and assistance between countries, because that has been a big limitation. So we need to build awareness to create the demand for engagement. In terms of the immediate opportunities, so unfortunately, most of them for the time being are limited to those non-state actors that have an official relations with WHO, which is a status that not so many of us have. But we are within some civil society groups trying to advocate for that this status is not a limitation for participation. For example, in the sessions of the IHR Review Committee, so there will be one on October 26th, then another open session in November, and one in January. So it's really an opportunity to hear from the members of the review committee where they are going and to ask questions. So it's these open sessions are open to member states, observers, and for now, those in official relations with WHO. There will be the meetings of the working group, so that will be really to follow the negotiations. So again, let's see what can be done in terms of participation. I don't know if you're familiar with the pandemic treaty process, but there have been the possibility to expand the list of what they call stakeholders to engage. So member states were able to nominate additional entities who will be able to follow the negotiations. So what we're doing right now is to try to at least have this list of entities that have been allowed for the INB to be allowed in the IHR conversations. And finally, which is the most informal but sometimes most efficient way of working, is the bilateral advocacy with governments, WHO, directly other UN agencies or entities that are observers or have a specific relationship with these processes. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Margot. I'm going to open the floor for questions, but before that, I wanna follow up on a couple of things. Thanks a lot. It was great, and it's very technical. I don't know if everyone on the call was ready for this, but I think it's also very important because, as you said, one of the essential roles of civil society is to work as watchdog, and you can't be a watchdog if you don't know what the rules of a game are. So it's important that we keep an eye on those things. The IHR Review Committee, are they bound by the amendments that have been proposed? Meaning, do they have to ever accept or reject these amendments, or can they fuse them? Can they make up new ones, etc.? Like, how bound are they by the proposals that have been made by the member states? That's my first question and remark. And the other one was regarding whether there was some links between the revision of the IHR and any of the funding mechanisms that we've seen emerging, and specifically, I mean the PVPR5. Is there any plans to link these channels of funding to the building of the core capacities that are listed under the IHR?
Thanks. On the first question, so the IHR Review Committee will have to first assess the amendments that have been proposed by member states and accept or reject, although that has been a little bit controversial, whether it's their role to accept or reject member states' proposals, but at least they will make a technical assessment, and they will be able to flag any gaps as well. So maybe not proposing amendments themselves, but saying, like, in this particular area, we've seen that it has not worked so well in the COVID response or any other response, or in terms of the preparedness. So you might want to consider an amendment here. So that's their prerogative. And your second point, a good one indeed. So yes, there is a link between, for example, the Financial Intermediary Fund and the IHRs, because when the assessments of the needs and in terms of preparedness was done, it was mostly based on the IHR monitoring and evaluation framework. So a lot of member states have developed national action plans following the joint external evaluations, some simulation exercises, also the regular annual reporting of the IHRs. So they have developed these national action plans that are available in countries but have not been funded. And we could assume, and that was put in a number of the background papers of the FIF, is that the FIF would be contributing to the implementation of these action plans. So the IHR capacities would be the baseline to measure where member states are and and where they have to go in terms of preparedness capacities. So there is definitely a link between the two.
Right, and as you said, and those national action plans, are they alongside the IHR focusing mostly on preparedness and response, or do they include prevention as well, as far as you know?
So it depends what you mean by prevention. So some of them, for example, it includes activities and indicators on routine immunization, for example. So that's on the, but yeah, most of it is more really what we call preparedness or readiness and response. So there hasn't been a lot of interaction, let's say, with people working on what we call health system strengthening, if you want, although it's very large. But it's more IHR related and really preparedness and response than the broader set of capacities for your health system to continue functioning during an emergency.
Right. And sorry, and last follow-up, and then I'll let other people speak. Though I'm not seeing any hands raised, so do raise your hand if you wanna jump in. But can you give us a bit more on the link between the joint external evaluations and the IHR? Because I know that this has been it's been something that I've looked at quite closely, because, and I think that is something that more broadly, when we look at what should be found when it comes to pandemic preparedness, the fact that the joint external evaluation scores have been quite bad at predicting countries' capacity to respond to COVID. Countries that have done very well on the joint external capacity. Sorry, for anyone who's so the joint external evaluation is a mechanism where countries and external experts report on. I think there's, correct me if I'm wrong, about 50 metrics around pandemic preparedness and response, one of the first findings of the independent panel on pandemic preparedness was that the GEE scores tended to very poorly correlate with a country's capacity to handle COVID. So some countries that had very good scores on this indicator did quite poorly. Some countries that had quite poor scores did fairly well, and so sorry. So to come back to it, Margot, is there any plans to reform the GE, or is there and is that linked to the revision of the IHR, or not particularly?
It's not linked directly to the to the amendments. So the JEs are one of the 4 components of the IHR monitoring and evaluation framework. So it's only because the IHR exists that WHO had the mandate to develop this tool, which was actually initially developed by the Global Health Security Agenda, but that they had the mandate to develop and then implement the tools in and with countries. So the JEs just published their 3rd edition. So right now, I don't think that there is a plan to modify them. But if there is, for example, amendments of the Annex 1 of the IHR, which are about the core capacities, what they are. So let's say you expand this list of core capacities, then you would have to expand the JEs as well. So that's how it's connected.
All right, thanks a lot. So is there anything else that anyone on the call wants to jump in and ask about? Apologies for a fairly technical presentation, but thank you a lot, Margot, for highlighting the role of civil society in all of this. And I think it's it's interesting, because I don't think that we had heard about the process before we realized that some of it is already done. One last question I will have is, do we know who are the members of the IHR? Because as you said, one of the few avenues for civil society engagement would be through bilateral engagements directly with member states, and as you said, directly with MOH, which are the ones that are most directly interacting with international health regulations. Is that typically a set number of bureaucrats in every MOH that tend to work specifically on this, or is there a specific a list of names and people that are members, that are members of the IHR review group that we could have access to?
Yeah, I've just pasted on the chat a link to the IHR review committee for the amendments, and you have the list of the members. So if you know some of them, yeah, you can reach out. Otherwise, when it comes to the negotiations, it will be the member states themselves.
All right, Margot. Thanks a lot for this presentation. I'm not seeing any questions. Again, the link is in the chat, people. If you want to have a look at who are the people who will be reviewing those amendments, and if you want to pass on a word on what you think your priorities should be. I think as civil society, I think something that from your presentation, Margot, the focus on genomics in particular, I would say is, why not? But it seems a lot less interesting than the focus on the actual functioning of the health system, in particular because that seemed to have been a more predictive indicator of success in fighting off COVID than actual than tech and materials and capacity. We're running out of time. Thanks a lot, Margot, for an excellent presentation. And thank you everyone for joining. As you saw, we have not yet sent the reminders for those calls onto the listserv. We're still deciding on a schedule for the next few months, and some of us are thankfully taking a break after New York. But we'll be resuming our usual schedule of a call every 2 weeks shortly enough. And it'll be warned in advance and not only a few days early as this time. Thanks a lot for joining, and see you all in 2 weeks for our next call, and take care in the meanwhile. Bye-bye, everyone.
See you later.